Welcome to episode 6.1 of Storycrafting. In episode 6, we took a look at the 3 types of point of view. First person with I and we, second person with you and your, third person with they and them. And we also broke third person down into objective, showing everything from the outside very factually, limited, following a singular character around, and omniscient, telling everything about anything. Now we're going to go into a little more detail and play with these different viewpoints to see what they can do. The key to good point of view is picking the right one for your story. Typically today, stories are written in third person limited, and for good reason. You get the outside realism while still following a singular character and really getting their emotional impact. But maybe you want your story to stand out and do something a little bit differently. First person could give us a really strong narrative with good internal monologue, so we can get a lot of reflection on what's going on. Or maybe second person can really bring the story into the face of the reader so that they are drawn into the action and feel the consequences. To get a taste of what these different perspectives can do, here are a few little scenes.
Well, it's been a long, hard day. Finally, time for dinner. This is gonna be a good sandwich. But wait, maybe we could use something a little bit more. How about some sweet, tangy ranch? Or a little spicy honey mustard?
That's a good looking sandwich, but it needs something to complete it. Could we use the tangy richness of ranch? Or perhaps a little bit of sinister honey mustard? What's it gonna be? Once you know what point of view you want to use, unless you're using third person omniscient or objective, you need to pick which character we're going to see the perspective through. So whose eyes are these? There's a general rule of thumb when it comes to picking your point of view character. Pick the character who has the most to lose. This will heighten the emotional impact. Typically, your point of view character is going to be your protagonist. He or she has a goal, and he or she is going to suffer if they don't meet this. However, if you're having multiple point of view characters, you can change up per scene who's going to be point of view and establish it through the same rule. Who has the most to lose in this scene, and who's going to have the greatest emotion? Pick that character and follow through, and your story will have the most gripping reaction it can. Once you know the point of view for your story, you know how to write your scenes. So for all of them, when you're writing your description, you're going to use the senses of the character involved, or follow the lens of whatever camera's seeing the story play out. So what is noticed first in the scene? What's something that really stands out? What are the things that reflect the mood that's going on in the scene? If you have a character point of view, then you're going to want to show the reactions to these events that happen. Give plenty of emotional detail. How are they feeling? Maybe they're physically ill, or maybe they're lightheaded in love. When it's something major, you can even go in and reflect on it. Why is this important? What is this about their life? Show some internal monologue. If it's minor, you may end up even cutting this part. Just like every day, we go through all kinds of events and happenstances with description and information that our brains just dump because they're not important. Now, if you're writing omnisciently, you can be encouraged to tie in everything to show all these details all the time, which that's going to bore the reader. Instead, remember what's the theme of the story. What's important to why you're telling this? Focus on those details. Give that description. And that's going to really make the story stand out. There are a lot of ways to play with point of view, especially if you have a narrator. So the narrator is kind of a pseudo-character that tells the story from the outside. Often this could be a first-person character, the person telling the story, like the famous Call Me Ishmael, starting off Moby Dick, which is a story of Captain Ahab pursuing this white whale that infuriates him. Other times, the author can act as the narrator and steps in as a character. This is usually used for jokes today, but it was taken very seriously in the 19th century when the story would break and you'd have a little section of "Dear Reader" from the author, telling them to calm down, everything's going to be okay, or maybe a little extra details to establish dramatic irony. Old radio plays involved a lot of narration to verbally paint the scenery, but from time to time the narrator would also slip information to the characters. In the animated classic Powerpuff Girls, the narrator shouted his displeasure at the evil super genius monkey Mojo Jojo for turning everyone into dogs. Then he himself was turned into a dog, barking narration until the Powerpuff Girls saved the day. One historically popular device is the frame narrator. Writers like H.G. Wells or Washington Irving would take ridiculous stories of horror or science fiction and relate them a little bit more believably by having themselves sit down next to a fire and first person listen to somebody else tell the story. It makes it a little bit more believable because you're hearing it just as somebody else did who doesn't even quite believe it themselves. When using a narrator, there's always the possibility of the unreliable narrator. This is when you have somebody telling the story either from the outside or following a character's perspective, and things aren't exactly as they seem. Maybe the character's lying outright, or maybe there are just a few little details twisted. Or maybe the character's a little crazy, and these are hallucinations that aren't actually there. Take, for example, Walter Mitty and The Secret Life of Walter Mitty from James Thurber. He's going on all these adventures as an explorer and a surgeon, but really they're just daydreams as he's trying to get away from his nagging wife. The unreliable narrator can be taken to the extreme by having multiple characters tell the same story, all from different perspectives. The Kurosawa classic Rashomon gives the story of a violent encounter in the woods, which should have been a clear-cut case, but the versions are wildly different from these point of views of a bandit, a samurai's wife, and a woodcutter. This causes enough confusion to make a priest question even his faith in humanity. Yet another way to tell a story is by using the epistolatory, or false document method. Often used today in found footage films, this kind of storytelling goes back to antiquity, with writers like Ovid telling about scrolls he found depicting strange tales on the frontier. A more modern example is Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is told through clippings out of various characters' diaries, ship logs, newspaper articles, and so on. The reader pieces together an increasingly horrifying tale from what seems to be the everyday. There are plenty of ways to tell a story, and the best way will depend on the story itself. For practice, I've attached a worksheet that will guide you into portraying the same scene in 4 different ways. Write it as if it were first person, second person, or 2 of the methods from third person, and take note of the differences point of view can provide. Figuring out point of view is a powerful foundation to set not only your writing, but each individual story upon. So writers, keep writing.